have your attention. Hello, 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 good evening. We're just about there. There it is. Well, good evening and welcome to the 2024 Spring Summit of AEI's Collegiate Network. I'm really glad to see you all. For those of you from the University of Florida, who I haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Jeff Pickering, and I'm Director of Academic Programs at the American Enterprise Institute. And thank you for welcoming us to Gainesville. And for all of our students coming from all around the country, I hope your travel was smooth, and I hope this nice, mostly sunny Florida weather is a nice reprieve for wherever you are coming from. We are really excited for these days together. It's something our team has been working on and planning, and we're excited to be partnered with the newly formed and rapidly growing and forming Hamilton Center for Classical and Civic Education. If you have been a Collegiate Network member with us for the last couple of years, you know that we like to take time in the spring to go partner with the university campus somewhere in the country for our spring summit. And you all in the room today through our network are the lucky few that are here when we decided to reserve this for graduating seniors only. So congratulations sticking with us and being here. This year's summit and our partnership between AEI and Hamilton Center really stems from the same core mission of forming and helping equip the next generation to consider the responsibilities of virtuous citizenship, the importance of civic discourse, and the value of the Western intellectual tradition. And if you are anything like us, you are recognizing that 2024 is a time of some pretty tumultuous events that are going to be a test for the constitutional order at home and the liberal international order abroad. And we're going to be covering those topics throughout our time together, bringing AEI scholars and people in our think tank community together with the faculty here at the University of Florida and at the Hamilton Center. So let me just do a little bit of table setting for the weekend. First, I want to start just with a quick wave of the hand introduction with our AEI academic program staff in the back. So anything you need, especially our sort of cruise ship director for this summit will be Camille Messer. So if you have any questions, find one of us and we will go find her. No, for real, you can ask any of us, but Camille has led the charge from our team putting this together. And I also want to be sure that you all meet James from Hamilton Center as well, but I'm not seeing you. There he is, James. So James would also be of great help to you. We did walk the campus. We think we know where we're going, so it shouldn't be the blind leading the blind here. So obviously tonight you're here at the stadium, and then tomorrow we will be tomorrow afternoon for all of our events, and then our dinner tomorrow night will just be right across the street at Emerson Alumni Hall. So the good news is if you make it here, you'll be able to make it there. So we're going to start our summit with dinner, and we will dismiss by tables. Juan and Allie from AEI's team will be dismissing you by table. And then around 7:30 or 7:40 or so, we will hear some welcome remarks from Will Inboden from the Hamilton Center, and then get started with our evening's panel programming. So welcome again. We're so glad you're here. And Juan and Allie, I'll let you begin dismissing tables.
Let's start from the back. So, I just feel back again. You guys can start, and then we'll have you guys follow, and we'll dismiss from there.
We're going to get started with our panel. sorry to interrupt, but we're going to get started with our panel for this evening.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Wonderful. We do care a lot about civic dialogue, but at some point, we do need to get started. So I'm going to introduce everybody that you'll be hearing from tonight, and then we will continue the show. So first up will be William N. Bowden, who is a professor and the director of the Hamilton Center here. Among his many affiliations, he is a member of the CIA Historical Advisory Panel and the State Department's Historical Advisory Committee, as well as a senior fellow with the DC-based Trinity Forum that we've done some programming with as well. He was previously at the University of Texas at Austin, where he led the Clements Center for National Security. In his public service roles, he served at the National Security Council, as well as the Department of State and the Office for International Religious Freedom. He was a Civitas Fellow at AEI and is a life member of the Council for Foreign Relations. His most recent book is The Peacemaker, Ronald Reagan, the Cold War, and the World on the Brink, published in 2022. Will come soon and give welcome remarks on behalf of the University of Florida and the Hamilton Center. But first, I want to introduce the rest of our moderator and our panelists as well. Moderating tonight's conversation is Robert Ingram, who is the Associate Director at the Hamilton Center. Before coming down here to Gainesville, he was a professor of history at Ohio University and the founding director of the Menard Family George Washington Forum. His research focuses on the early history of liberal democracy in the English-speaking world, with a particular focus on religion and politics. Relevant for this night's conversation, he is the author of a 2018 book, Reformation Without End, Religion, Politics, and the Past in Post-Revolutionary England. Next up from the Hamilton Center, we have Jeffrey Collins, who's a professor of humanities here. Previously, he was a professor of history at Queen's University. In 2020, he published In the Shadow of Leviathan, John Locke and the Politics of Conscience, which was awarded a prize from the American Historical Association. He's been a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Chicago and is a life fellow of the University of Cambridge's Clare Hall and a member of the Royal Historical Society. And joining from AEI is Jonah Goldberg, who holds the Asmus Chair in Applied Liberty at our institute, where he is also a senior fellow. He writes about political and cultural issues and is concurrently the editor-in-chief of The Dispatch. He hosts the Remnant podcast and is a weekly columnist with the Los Angeles Times. Most recently, in 2018, he published Suicide of the West, How the Rebirth of Tribalism, Populism, Nationalism, and Identity Politics is Destroying American Democracy. And on that cheery note, I will welcome up William N. Bowden.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, and welcome to everyone here. We have a few of our Florida students here, our UF students, Go Gators, and of course, many of you coming from other universities hither and yon across this great land. It is especially, I think, appropriate to be hosting you here in the F Club room inside the most important building on our campus, which is the football stadium. Any of you from other football schools will appreciate that. And with that, as a relative newcomer to this university and the state, I should also caution or admonish all other of our visitors here, when you are walking across campus or going back to Hotel Elio tonight, don't go for a swim in the ponds. They really do have alligators. The warning signs are serious. So one of the things I've been having to adjust to as a newcomer here. As Jeff mentioned, when he was going through a little bit of my violin background, 23 years ago, I was a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. I was finishing up my dissertation at a one-year fellowship there, and it was absolutely transformative for me. My life, my career, my way of thinking. I've been excited at the opportunity to do it, but little could I have known. I just had a cubicle there where I was, plugging away in my dissertation. But on my hallway, and this was in the old AEI building at 17th and M, before their palatial new digs were bought and finished. was kind of a murderous row of great scholars and figures and thinkers. Michael Novak, Gene Kirkpatrick, Leon Kass, Judge Robert Bork, Walter Burns, Irving Kristol, Jim Lilly, others I could go on. And it turned into this almost kind of unexpected extra year of graduate education for me. I'd had this routine where every morning I'd show up in my cubicle, get a little a cup of coffee, and then just kind of go down the aisle into each of these offices, popping in and having these wonderful conversations with these real luminaries. As I'll share in a moment, little did I know that so much of what I learned then, from them, about them, would be themes that are now very much what we're trying to do here at the University of Florida Hamilton Center. So, you've heard the saying that life is.
I don't say University of Florida in your content.
Better now than when you're up here, Jeff. So, but I can certainly look back now and I think see a real the hand of Providence here in giving me that special year at AEI. It also was, by the way, I should say, and this will be just mere history for most of you, it'll be a memory for a few of the older ones here. I started at AEI on September 1st, 2001. If you're thinking carefully, you realize that was 10 days before 9/11. So I was at the AEI building on 9/11, vivid memories of rushing out to the rooftop and seeing the Pentagon enmeshed in a horrid black pillar of smoke, watching the Twin Towers fall on TV in Norm Ornstein's office. So that was also very, very pivotal for me in what later became the foreign policy portion of my career. As I mentioned, it was formative for what we're doing now here. With the Hamilton Center, we are the newest academic unit at the University of Florida. We'll soon be upgraded to the Hamilton School, the Hamilton College. We're in the process of recruiting our faculty, offering our first spate of classes, designing our curriculum. And there's a few themes that animate what the Hamilton Center is doing or trying to do now that I can look back and see I was learning on that hallway at AEI 23 years ago. I'll just mention 4 of those themes about what the Hamilton Center is trying to do now and what I was learning 23 years ago. The first is multidisciplinary, right? A fancy term for the fact that no one major can teach you everything you need to know about life and how the world works. So going back to those names I mentioned, but many of them are no longer with us. They might not have been familiar to you. Gene Kirkpatrick, a renowned international relations scholar who was also President Reagan's ambassador to the United Nations, a great stateswoman in her own right. So from her, I got great tutorials in international relations and foreign policy. Michael Novak, the late Catholic theologian and philosopher, where I would have wonderful discussions about theology, about political economy. Leon Kass, who fortunately is still with us, a real polymath at the time. He's doing a lot of work in bioethics and learned so much from him on that. Judge Bork, one of the eminent constitutional law thinkers of our time. Walter Burns, one of the great political philosophers of our time. Irving Kristol, who you can talk to about anything, right? And would always learn something. So none of them was monopolized by a particular discipline. Going up and down that hall, I would learn from all these different disciplines, all these different professional backgrounds. That is what we're trying to do with the Hamilton Center. It's not just a place for historians or for literature scholars or philosophers or political theorists, maybe even a straight economist. Rather, our theme is we believe that we want scholars who can work with and be conversant with all those disciplines, because we think that it's that breadth is enabled for a really rich education. The second theme that I learned 23 years ago at AEI, which we're trying to implement now, is about the value of ideas and learning in its own right, okay, and really cherishing that, but also thinking carefully about its applications, right? What does this mean for public life? The public-mindedness of the AEI mission. So too are we trying to capture that with the Hamilton Center, that we want to be equipping our students for meaningful careers, for thinking through the implications of our research and our teaching for how we can hopefully make our community, our nation, our world a better place. Or at least a less bad place. The third one, I didn't fully appreciate it at the time how patient and indulgent these senior scholars were with this, kind of obnoxious graduate student from Yale who kept on showing up in their office, expecting them to hold forth for about an hour so I could learn from them. They had more important things to be doing. But each one of them, in his or her own way, took mentorship and teaching really seriously. They saw something, I still don't know what, and in me as a much younger person, worth investing in and taking time out for much more important things they could be doing. Anyway, we very much see the value of mentoring and teaching at the Hamilton Center. All of our faculty are coming primarily because we are so devoted to teaching and to mentoring. And the fourth one is this. Values. All these scholars I mentioned that I learned from at AEI, who invested in me, they cherished ideas for their own sake. They thought about the public application, the public mindedness, the policy relevance of this. But even though they crossed a certain gamut politically and they had their own disagreements, they all share a common set of values, which I would just say a commitment to citizenship and to the values of a free society, of knowing and understanding that a free society cannot continue in perpetuity without some sort of self-consciousness, some sort of passing on these values to the next generation, some sort of cultivating and mentoring and training that we do believe in something, and that we are committed to something larger than ourselves, what it actually means to be a citizen. And so those animate what we are trying to do now with the Hamilton Center. We have much work to do. We're just at the beginning of this journey. It's a great shot in the arm and boost to us to be able to be partnering with such a venerable institution as AEI and so many really renowned and brilliant AEI scholars, as you'll be hearing from tonight and tomorrow. We are humbled to be in your presence. We are humbled to have the Hamilton banner next to the AEI banner, right? Now we really know we've arrived. And we hope that we can be agreeable hosts for all of you over the next 24 hours, which we hope will be an enjoyable and meaningful time. So thank you very much. Now we'll hear from our main event for the night.
Welcome to the swamp. It's good to see all of you join Will and welcome you here. There are a lot of holes around here filled with water that do have snakes and alligators. Our local guides, though, should be able to direct you to safer watering holes, since all of you are seniors, presumably 21, right out on University Avenue. So afterwards, seek out a local who should be able to help you on your way back to Hotel Elio. We will not be joining you in the Salty Dog or the Social tonight, but we are glad that you are here. The Hamilton Center,
and it's not reimbursable.
Yeah. The Hamilton Center, which Will leads, and of which Jeff and I are part, are filled with, I like to say, with refugees. There were people who came from what I call a sad but certain future at other universities to come here to Gainesville to build something new, different, better, and exciting. And we left those places. We took the risks that we did. Will leaves UT Austin, Jeff leaves Canada, not such a huge loss. But we took that risk because we were worried about higher education, and also I think we had concerns about politics. And we've increasingly come to realize that the state of American politics and the state of American higher education are actually things that are bound up together. And so it's really good tonight to be able to have someone who knows a lot about American politics, Jonah, and a lot about American higher education, Jeff, here on the stage tonight. We'll see what we can have. I'll just try to tee up a few questions for them for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to turn it over to you to have you ask questions, because you're the people who are most important here in the room tonight. So Jonah, let me just start with you with the political situation, right? A lot of the people in this room may think that the war began sometime on like the second Tuesday of November of 2016. That may be the kind of formation moment of their political lives. I'm reliably informed that there was light before then. So maybe just, what is your understanding of the state of American politics that we're in right now? And maybe that's a place we can start off to think about higher education and politics.
Sure. Okay, we can do this? Okay. Hi. First of all, it is great to be here. I just want to say real quick, there's a weird kind of good news story about places like the Hamilton Center. I started at AEI about 10 years before you did in a similar role. I got my graduate education, to the extent I had one at all, at AEI. And I always used to compare AEI to like the Irish monasteries during the Dark Ages, where they would keep the light of civilization going until the dark and ignorant masses were ready to receive the wisdom again. And the sign, and so AEI was one of these places where a lot of people were chased out of universities because, literally people like Walter Burns at gunpoint. Yeah. And so it's now it's a hopeful sign that they're ready to go. The missionaries are ready to go back out, more like fighting monks from the Shaolin Temple, but you get the point. Look, there's a technical term from political science that kind of describes American politics pretty well. I don't want to get all jargony, but the term is, it sucks. And there are many reasons for it. We can't get into all of them. We can't even get into most of them. But I think the financial crisis of 2008 really, there's a pretty established finding in the literature that says financial crises of that kind have very long tails and lead to all sorts of populism for all sorts of reasons. And I think that was one of the things that Trump was downstream of. Donald Trump did not create all the problems we have with American politics, but he made all the problems that we have with American politics worse. And I am a passionate both sideser. I think both parties have huge problems. One of the reasons why we have the problems in our politics we do is that, contrary to a lot of conventional wisdom, strong partisanship comes from weak parties, not strong parties. Everyone who thinks that the parties are too powerful don't understand that the parties have almost no power at all. They're basically brand names that whoever wins a primary contest gets to take over. It's like my friend Ross Douthat said in 2016, both parties are like fully fueled jetliners waiting on the tarmac to be hijacked. And the parties don't care about their actual philosophical coherence. They don't care about their long-term brand value. They are simply in a contest every 4 years to reinvent themselves based on whatever personality can take them over. And the result of that is people internalize their partisanship rather than let the parties and Congress work out politics on their own. Congress is where politics is supposed to happen. The parties are supposed to fight about politics so you don't have to care about it. And instead, everyone internalizes it and sees it as a kind of religion. The other reason why our politics sucks, and again, there are many more reasons, but the other reason, I'll just leave it with this, as Henry VIII said to each of his wives, I won't keep you long, is that it turns out that the bases of both parties, where the people who show up, right, these are the people who really define the thing, hate their own parties. The base conservatives think the Republican Party is a bunch of sellout establishment rhino squishes, which is incredibly stupid because, they talk about how we got to get rid of the Rockefeller Republicans, and the Rockefeller Republicans died out during the Pleistocene, and the leadership of the Republican Party has never been more conservative in the last 10 years, and yet they're always being, we're always being told that they're too liberal and they're too squishy and all that kind of nonsense. And same thing with the Democratic Party. The Squad, Bernie Sanders hates the Democratic Party. He's been an enemy of the Democratic Party for 40 years. But he stole the brand so he could run for president. But the Squad crowd, AOC, all those people, they do nothing but denounce the sellout corporate liberalism of their own party. The problem is they hate the other party more. And so we live in a time where the people who really hate politics in any meaningful way run our politics. Because we've democratized, we are the only advanced industrialized country in the world whose parties have voluntarily given up the ability to pick their own candidates. Instead, we put it out for a vote with 9% of the electorate, and that 9% of the electorate is out of its frickin' gourd. And so my wife had my favorite New Yorker cartoon blown up and framed for me a few birthdays ago, because I'm so cool. And it's two dogs at a bar. And one dog says, and they're in suits and they're drinking martinis or whatever, and one dog says to the other dog, you know, it's really not good enough that dogs succeed. Cats must also fail. And that's what how our politics is defined now, is both parties are running as the cats must also fail party. It's the worst thing you can say in any Republican primary or Democratic party primary, but really in Republican primaries is, when I get elected, I'm going to work with the other side to get things done for you. What they want to hear is, I'm going to cut off the other side's skull, turn it into a goblet, and drink their tears. And that's not what politics is for. That's what politics is supposed to avoid. But we've lost sight of that.
So, Jeff, I'm not going to ask you to follow that, but I am. Students have to read books, right? I mean, you know, from the past to sort of help understand moments like the one that Jonah described, which is not unusual to American politics. What do you tell them to go look and read?
Lord of the Flies?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are a lot of parallels. I agree with everything Jonah said about the state of partisan politics in the United States and the sort of short-term causes of this kind of populist upsurge. And it is true, we seem to live through this period of intense rage of party. It's amazing how close our elections are. Have you noticed this? Every damn time it comes down to 2 votes and it takes 6 weeks to count. And I mean, it's like a Schmittian process of friend and enemy. And yet, yes, the parties are weak. They cancel their primaries constantly. They abuse their privileged legal positions. And it's something we should look at in the country is to, we really need 2 parties because, you know, we have a federal system and the separation of powers, and so to have a multi-party system on top of that would make the thing completely unworkable, but they're abusing their privileged status. So I agree with everything you said about the short term, but you're right. I mean, there are longer historical dimensions to the crisis we're facing. Some of these, I think, are in fact historically unprecedented. So to learn history is to sort of realize how unprecedented some of these phenomena are. I think we're seeing unprecedented levels of social segregation in the West. I mean, it's really unheard of for all of our elites in all parts of the country to be scooped up and dumped into five or six cities. It's created enormous problems, I think, of understanding and mutuality and reciprocity. The demographic crisis we're about to face is unprecedented in many respects. Other things aren't unprecedented, and you do see historical precedents for them, and usually they're hair-raising. The debt levels we're facing. I'll direct you to the French Revolution, I'll direct you to the English Civil War. These debt levels do not end well. The financial crisis we just lived through could be kid stuff compared to what we might face if we don't get our handle on that. You know, they don't talk about this. It's not even part of the political conversation. At base, I think we are also living through, and this is where the Reformation, the 17th century, the crisis of the 17th century, the sort of context which produced the political theory of Hobbes and Locke, the sort of origins of liberalism. We're living through a serious sort of a collapse of moral agreement. I think we are living through something that in a way looks like the Reformation, the wars of religion. We've developed kind of better coping mechanisms for moral disagreement in liberal societies. But I actually think the moral disagreements that we have are deeper than the moral disagreements that they had. I mean, they disagreed, Catholic, Protestant. Of course, there were always the Muslims and Jews to kick around back then. So religious differences were very intense, but they were agreed on religiosity, basically. They had a sort of social mores that emerged out of that agreement. We can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, but I mean, we are living through an era where there's a sort of unprecedented amount of secularization, atheism, and agnosticism. That's a legitimate intellectual position, absolutely, but it produces kind of disagreements on moral matters that would have been unimaginable even 50 years ago. And I think a lot of our politics is a culture war. And a lot of our legal fights are a sort of translated culture war. We like to translate our moral disagreements into kind of language of rights and equities. This is an American habit. So, you know, who gets to resolve in courts? But it's essentially that. And I am very concerned about that. So I mean, I think that, and this is basically unprecedented too, the levels of secularization really, and the struggles of that. And I'm not here to tell you you shouldn't be secular or an atheist if that's your personal position, but I mean, I think we have to confront the fact that there is a sort of, at base, a kind of two cultures problem here. The old people used to fight, the Catholics and the Protestants were on one side of that, right? And then there's, and if you look at the statistics on this, it's quite striking how quickly religious affiliation is collapsing in the United States. So the United States was always thought to be somewhat exceptional in its birth rates and its religiosity, and those exceptional features of the United States are going away, and we're becoming more like Europe. So I think, as for text, I didn't really answer your question. So go read Hobbes and Locke, you'll learn all about this. But I mean, effectively, I think that's the kind of historical parallel that always strikes me as most damaging, along with the ruinous debt.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like ecumenism. I mean, I grew up in Louisiana in the 70s and the 80s. A state that was like, I used to say, like an indigent man's Ireland. That actually Protestants lived in the north, Catholics in the south. My sister, who's just a couple years younger than I am, went on an intra-state cultural exchange program within Louisiana to understand what it was like to live among Catholics, right? As a Presbyterian girl in Louisiana, Catholics duly came north to do that. So there was real sort of, if you're in your 50s and above, it's hard to kind of appreciate the kind of ecumenism that goes on at a place like the Madison Center or something like that at Princeton. And a lot of it's happening for some of the same reasons that Jeff has pointed out. It's like, oh, geez, we realized we all have each other is not the problem. The problem are people who don't even share some of the fundamentals that we do. Well, on that cheery opening, let's turn to something even more fun, American higher education. So we have two people here, one who lives in the beast, and the other who gets to live outside of it, but occasionally visit it. So maybe I'll just start with you, Jonah. So as you look at universities from the outside, what do you see going on in them that would lead legislatures across basically every red state, but including now in some kind of purplish states, to say, wait, something's not right in these public institutions, and we need to intervene. What's your take on that?
Sure. So I've probably spoken the last 20 years at, 100 campuses, and I think that one of the things that is really, so like political correctness is what we used to call woke stuff when I was, in the 90s, and political correctness, wokeism, whatever label you want to put on it, has been around to one extent or another, depending on where you want to start it, 100 years. What's different with basically your generation, kids a little older, is that this is the generation that the politically correct crowd was waiting for. Look, I was telling Jeffrey earlier, I went to an all-women's college. I got rejected from every college I applied to and ended up going to I used to joke I was the Rosa Parks of gender integration. But there were 32 men and over 1,000, 30 odd men and over 1,000 women, and I mean 30 odd men. And all of this stuff existed to one way or another back then too. What's different is that it has sort of mass appeal, particularly among elite college kids. And I think one of the reasons for that is that this is the first generation, particularly sort of the Ivy League kind of crowd, where elite kids, and I don't mean elite because they're the best, I just mean the top 10% from economically speaking kind of thing. It's the first generation that grew up with, where in the climate of what Jonathan Haidt would call hyper-safetyism, where I'm not in favor of bullying, but the zero tolerance for bullying thing has created a kind of culture where the worst thing you could do is make someone else feel bad, right? Just make hurt their feelings in any way. And if you have an interpersonal conflict, what you're supposed to do is go find a third-party adult intercessor to adjudicate it, because you're not supposed to actually do it yourself, right? And and to be made to feel unsafe is a great crime. And so a generation, which again I'm speaking in broad terms, that's raised that way, it's going to be particularly susceptible to the idea that words hurt, that speech is violence, that, that speech is violence, but violence is only speech, which I think you have to be too stupid to be a spell checker at an M&M factory to believe. But, and so you would expect that kind of generation to want trigger warnings, right? To want to be told in advance, some of this content may make you feel unsafe, may make you feel weird. And I think there are a lot of academics, activist academics, who've taken advantage of that in a certain way on a lot of these campuses. I also think there's a healthy reaction to it, which I think is also going on and is worth telling. And I think things like the Hamilton Center are part of it. But I always argue that you can tell all sorts of progressive utopian movements by the utopia that they describe. And there are a lot of people in American elite culture who basically want to make America into a vast college campus, where the worst thing you can do is make someone feel bad, where all oars are supposed to pull in the same direction, where it's funny, I used to say this all the time I go to all these schools that rejected me. And one of the things I would always point out is that there is this really weird ideological fixation at most of these schools that says to be progressive, right, or liberal, depending on, they're not really liberal, so we'll call them progressive. To be progressive is rebellious, right? They're told that this is the way you're being transgressive and running against the grain. And I always like to say to them, okay, so let me get this straight. Your professors are liberal, the administrators are liberal, the media is liberal, publishing is liberal, Hollywood is liberal, the fashion industry is liberal, the music industry is liberal, and you think you're sticking it to the man by agreeing with them? And they would always look at me like, when my old basset hound would look at me when I tried to feed it a grape. It was just sort of total unblinking incomprehension. But the reality is like this is the part of the transgressive nature of a lot of elites. And my boss at AEI, my immediate boss at AEI, Yuval Levin, who's not only a handsome man but a powerful man, he makes this point that left-right is less useful these days than insider-outsider. And the problem is we have a whole bunch of elites running a lot of institutions that don't want the responsibility of actually running institutions. They want to claim that they're these rebellious, transgressive outsiders taking on the establishment, taking on the elite. I love listening to Ted Cruz on the Senate floor talking about how he's taking it to the elites. The guy who went to Princeton, Harvard Law, was a Solicitor General of Texas, and has been a senator for 2,000 years, and whose wife is a managing partner at Goldman Sachs, talking about how he's taken on the elite. It's like, really? Okay. But you find this in a lot of college campuses is like the faculty don't like the idea that they're actually responsible for character formation. The administrations don't like to believe that. Everyone wants to be taking on the system rather than actually being the ones responsible for it. And that's because in our culture today, everyone wants to be a rebel. No one wants to be the person in charge and taking responsibility. And I see that on a lot of college campuses.
So I guess I would begin with the obvious point that the problem of higher education in the United States is the ideological capture of these faculties. The monoculture of particularly elite schools, but really across the board, progressive politics and secular opinions on religion is impossible to exaggerate. And it may feel like that's been a timeless thing, but it really isn't. The surveys of faculty in the United States, the reliable surveys of their political views goes back to about the 60s. And in those early surveys and through the 70s and the 80s and really into the early 90s, you could reliably get about 30 to 33% of faculty identifying as conservative of some stripe. That's collapsed to basically 6 or 7% since the mid-90s. So there's been some sort of tipping point was reached. And it's become such an insider game that they don't really need to gatekeep anymore. They don't need to try. They just agree with each other. And so the interesting subjects, the good candidates are clear to them. And so they don't feel that they're engaging in any sort of corruption. It's become so naturalized. Why that happened is debated, but I think it's now reached the point, particularly at very selective schools and smaller schools. So this is less true at a selective state school like Florida or something where it's just bigger and mostly makes its admissions decisions on academic grounds. But at a small place like Princeton or something, they're curating the entering classes brutally. The admissions to Princeton is done for Princeton. It's not done for the students. We're seeing this now reflected in the student bodies at those elite schools. So the Crimson at Harvard does a yearly survey of their entering class. This year's survey had progressive political views at 68% and conservative or very conservative views at 8%. Now, I think there's probably some self-selection here. I think most conservatives probably crumple up the survey from the Crimson. So let's double it. Let's say it's 16%. This is still wildly out of whack. By the way, more than 50% of the students are atheists. Protestants are 6%. John Harvard's spinning in his grave at this. So, I mean, this is just so glaring, so obvious that it requires explanation. And I think, what is the effect of this? The effect of this is to some extent, we tend to think, if we're on right of center, that the problem is the crimping of academic freedom. And that is a problem, often. But academic freedom doesn't do you any good if there's only one position to be aired, right? So the fundamental problem, I think, is that demographic problem, that you're just not representative of the society that they're meant to serve. This is extremely dangerous for universities, and I think it's starting to dawn on them how dangerous it is. Because they're dependent on legislatures and political support. Their social capital is fragile. I mean, Greg Conti, the Princeton professor, recently wrote a very good column I commend to you called The Sectarian University, which suggested that the elite universities of the country are going to go the way of the New York Times, which is to say that their broader influence will shrink as they become more and more sort of ideological, but deepen among their supporters. They'll become sectarian. And they'll be untouchable in a sense, but they're going to lose, because they're so rich, but they're going to lose the broad influence and respect that they had and the leadership that they had in higher education. They've already lost it, I think, but it's going to be hard to get back. So this is what we're trying to do here is combat that. And all you really have to do to combat that is drop the screens, drop the gatekeeping, and then just advertise. Because one of the things they do is, yes, they impose kind of ideologies often inside the classroom, critical race theories and so forth, and read Shakespeare through the gender lens and no other way and so on. But that's not really the main problem. The main problem is that they're just euthanizing various fields that they consider too male or too white or too colonial or too Western or too European. So at Harvard, there are not senior faculty teaching the French Revolution anymore. They don't teach the American Revolution at Harvard. Cradle of the American Revolution. The school where Bernard Bailyn, the great colonial Americanist, was my professor not that long ago. I'm not that old. So, I mean, it's just disgraceful what's happening. And it's that curriculum shaping that's really the insidious thing. So just advertising in fields like military history, diplomatic history, Jacobean literature, Jane Austen. I mean, suddenly there are people out there to apply, but we have to rebuild these fields almost. So that's part of the project here, is just to kind of rebuild fields. It's not, we're not putting a kind of counter-ideological screen on our hiring. It's rather just rebuilding the traditions inside of these subjects, reanimating some of these fields. And that will necessarily widen the aperture and the ambit and the perspectives of the faculty.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say the thing about the Hamilton Center, one of the things that distinguishes us is that we're the only humanities or social science department at the University of Florida who doesn't daily break the law. Which is to say, we genuinely don't have ideological screens. That makes us extraordinarily unusual. If you were an out-of-the-closet conservative and you applied to the English department at the University of Florida, you would have a 0.0% chance of making it to a Zoom interview. Forget making it actually to an on-campus or to a job interview. So maybe I'll ask, Jeff has sort of pointed toward it. Jonah, Jeff, this isn't going to happen. Reform of higher education probably isn't going to happen at private universities. Just not. There's not the pressure for it. There's they're super deep pockets, but places that rely on public funding, lots of it, state universities, maybe there's more chance of it. So from each of your perspectives, what can be done to regain public trust, which demonstrably has been lost in institutions of higher education, which are, you know, one of the West's notable achievements, the church, indoor plumbing, you know, higher education. These are all great things. So what can be done from your perspective to sort of regain the trust? When would you start retrusting the universities of, I don't know, Northern Virginia, where you live, or Maryland?
Flamethrowers. No, I'm actually less pessimistic that this can't happen in private universities than you are. Not to say I'm not pessimistic, but I'm not fatalistic about it. Because look, first of all, and I've been saying this for a very long time, if you're, you know, just call it right of center or not non-conventional progressive, right? If you go to a lot of these elite schools, elite private, you know, universities, you're going to come out, if you stick with it 4 years later, just a good deal sharper than the smartest left-wing kids. And there are a lot of smart left-wing kids. I'm not trying to take it back, but best learning is Socratic. Best learning is to have your priors questioned, to be asked a bunch of questions about why you think the way you think, and I edited a book called Proud to Be Right about young conservatives in basically higher education or just out of college, and I made this point in the introduction, which is that there's a reason why blacks, gays, Canadians, and Jews are so overwhelmingly dominate stand-up comedy. And it's because minority cultures have to know their own culture, but also the majority culture. It gives them this way of sitting slightly outside the fishbowl. So kids who grow up in Canada, they watch American TV, and it's just alien enough that they, like a visitor from Mars, they can spot the weird things that Americans don't notice because, you know, fish don't know they're wet, and they can make fun of it. That's what humor is like finding common things and finding the weird connections. And so kids who are outside of the mainstream on a lot of these elite schools, they come out just a bit, the strongest fish are the ones that go against the tide rather than float with it. Dead fish float downstream, live fish swim upstream. And I think that lesson can work its way through the culture pretty quickly. And I think, you know, the October 7th stuff, we don't have to get deep in the weeds in this. I'm just going to tell you my priors that I'm against mass rape and cutting off babies' heads. And if we want to have an argument about that, we can, but that's just where I come from. And, but the number of people who said, wait a second, I thought I was an ally. I thought, you know, that Jews were part of the coalition of the oppressed, and now it turns out that, you know, you can't say, you can be disciplined, expelled, whatever, for saying men can't get pregnant, but, you know, gas the Jews is, you know, you need context, you need to understand both sides. And there are a lot of liberal Jews who are sort of said, wait a second, what have I been, you know, supporting here? And the weird thing about higher education, particularly private universities, is while in reality you're right, they're really rich. They're basically, you know, private equity firms that have classes on the side. They think they need big donors. And when big donors just say, enough with this, it sends a signal through the system pretty quickly. When boards of trustees no longer just sort of passively, you know, defer to anybody with, you know, suede elbow patches on their jacket, it sends a signal pretty quickly. And so I think these things can change. Things like, you know, what Robbie George is doing at Princeton, what you guys are starting here, sends market signals pretty quickly, or can send market signals pretty quickly. So I'm a T.S. Eliot guy. There's no such thing as a truly lost cause because there's no such thing as a truly won cause. You just got to keep the fight going. And but where I would start is in some ways with the students. I mean, one of the reasons why I think places like Princeton and MIT, well, I should say Princeton, MIT and Harvard and others discriminated against Asians wasn't because they were anti-Asian in some sort of like 19th century yellow peril bigotry kind of thing. It's that Asian Americans tend to be from either first or second generation immigrant families. And Asians, much like Jews of yore, they actually think you should go to college to like get a good job. That an education is at least a hedge against poverty, if not necessarily a guarantee of wealth. And so a lot of them didn't speak the shibboleths of social justice and didn't want to be part of an indoctrination program, and that sent a weird, there's this anti-bourgeois thing in a lot of higher education, and they were the easiest ones to cut out because they were less of a legacy admission. Their parents or grandparents didn't go there because, again, they're immigrant kids, and that's been changed. I mean, the Supreme Court decision was a big deal. What California did, 25 years ago was a big deal, but these changes are just going to be sort of incremental. Because I think most Americans, including most African Americans in polls, are not in favor of a lot of the things that these elite universities cling to in terms of the way they define their role in curating their student bodies. The trick really is just not to give up on the stuff that really matters, and you take your victories where you can.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Joe, and I'm not quite as pessimistic as Robert. Robert's generally pessimistic about most things. And I do think, this Hindenburg moment that they had before Congress is an example of the kind of thing that could start to happen more regularly, and the ripping off the mask. I mean, to listen to these three, you would have thought that they've been pursuing kind of radical libertarian free speech policies for decades, and they're just applying this to this particular situation. It's absurd. Everybody knows how these universities put out lists of words you can't use, the pronoun policies, all sorts of safe spaces, trigger warnings, and so forth. And suddenly they become libertarians on this one issue. So, I mean, those kind of moments, they actually forced out a couple of these very powerful academic university presidents. The donor question will start to bite. I think there are one thing we can't do is, in my estimation, is to fight fire with fire. Like, I do not think, listen, there's a place in the kind of grand ecology of American higher ed for Hillsdale, for an Ave Maria, and so forth. That's not going to turn the tide. Having a catechism, making a center that's a kind of natural law center or a kind of nest of Straussians or something, that's not what needs to be done. What needs to be done is to recover honest, liberal education that doesn't have an ideological screen, that isn't afraid to teach the canon, that isn't scared of teaching Western civilization, critically, of course. I mean, this isn't heritage history or something. But that model, ideally, will shame some of these departments, and they'll see the quality of people being hired and the kind of quality of teaching, and hopefully the students will vote with their feet to some extent. And I think they will, because these departments have lost such massive numbers of students. And I don't think it's because the actual appeal of these subjects has disappeared. I think they've driven away most conservatives, they've driven away a lot of moderates. To some extent, they've driven away people interested in subjects like military history or certain fields. So those markets are still out there for successful departments. So if we can stand those up and not become and not just Hamilton, but there are many of these being founded, not become sort of exiled faculty, but rather model faculty, I think that'll be the way to go. There are other sort of mechanical things I think should happen. I am a big proponent of getting rid of dean's special interest and legacy admissions and so forth. One of the dirty secrets of these schools is that in addition to letting in donors' children, if you look at the Harvard special interest list that gets admitted, it's all the kids of congressmen and senators too. So they've kind of bribed off the regulatory classes. You ever wonder why there aren't hearings on legacy admissions in the Senate? So there are some things that we can do just to sort of clean up their act, and that may also have some salutary benefits. But it's going to be a long slog. But I mean, I do think it has to be diplomatic, it has to be outreach. It cannot be. And the final option that is looming out there, and really scares me, is to burn it all down. And there's a real instinct on the right to do that. And if we cannot recover a kind of serious conservative and even just moderate, small L liberal intellectual class at these universities, we won't be able to stem the worst excesses of populism on the right inside the American political system. And the universities will continue to become more and more alienated from half the country. So that has to be stopped, because I think there are politicians who will see it in their career interest to defund, tear down, send everybody online, send them all to vocational schools. There's a place for all that, absolutely. Maybe we are putting too many kids through liberal arts, I don't know. But I mean, we need these institutions, and these institutions have traditionally been some of the grandest and most successful institutions in the country and the world. A really important source of soft power for the United States. And if we lose them, it'll be a terrible blow to us, I think.
Yeah. Questions from the audience. We have a little bit of time. Always. So I'm going to move from uncharacteristic from left to right here. So let you ask the question. Yeah.
Well, my name is Hudson Holbein. Thank you guys for being here at Taylor University. So probably like many of my peers here, as a senior, I'm thinking a lot about tuition. So I would love to ask a historical economic question about higher education today. So what do you make of public and private university tuition hikes? What does the history of tuition in higher education tell us about our temporal position? And how do these hikes come about, and what sort of impact do you think it will have on civic discourse for future generations?
I mean, maybe I'll just start. I'm paying for one child to go through college at a private school right now, and I have another who's a junior. Jeff's just sent a couple kids through college too. So
hold me.
Very, very concerned about this. One thing I will say: University of Florida in-state tuition is $6,930. And the total tuition fees, room and board at UF is $20,000. So I will say one thing for my newly adopted state. We've done an amazing job in the state sponsoring higher education. The state has done this, but also in keeping costs low here. It's a terrible problem though, and totally get it. I think as a concern. I'll leave it to John and Jeff to maybe have other questions about it.
Well, you're more expert, so I'll do cleanup.
Yeah, I think we need a dictatorial president to wipe away everybody's student loan debt and destroy the constitutional order because of this problem. But no, I don't. I mean, it is a problem. I think, if I can say something maybe a little unpopular, I think it can be exaggerated. If you look at the average debt of an American university graduate, mostly because a lot go to state schools and so forth, it's on par with Canada and Britain. It's a little less than Britain, actually. Europe is better off, but that's because they've destroyed all the universities and made them into public utilities. So the problem is really, and I have a feeling a lot of you went to schools like this, the problem is really elite private schools. And then it's some of the more expensive, like the California system, where they really jack tuition. I'm a faculty member, so I'll just blame administrative bloat and pass it on.
Okay, so I was going to do administrative bloat, but I want to see if you do it first. The number of sort of ideological commissars that don't actually have anything to do with educating kids is, I think, a huge problem. And some of the schools have amazing numbers of ratios of administrators to faculty that are just nuts.
1 to 1.
Yeah, it's just crazy, right? But the other thing. There is, Alex Tabarrok, I think it's George Mason, makes the case that a chunk of it is attributable to what economists call Baumol's disease. And the classic example of Baumol's disease is if you look at what his example was a string quartet, and what a professional string quartet that plays classical music, that kind of thing, the kind of guys who kept playing when the Titanic went down in a terrible movie. The amount of money they get paid, the inflation for their salaries is kind of wild. And it kind of tracks, conceptually with the inflation in tuition. And the argument for it is that the amount of training that you need to do to become a classically trained musician is commensurate with the amount of training you need to do to become a lawyer or a doctor. And so the people who go into those professions, they expect to be compensated for their investment in time in a way that justifies the careers they've chosen. Now, of course, string quartet players don't make as much money as lawyers or doctors, but the inflation of their salaries is pretty high for the simple reason that they come from a social milieu where the market will continue to pay for it. It's sort of like the amount of labor that goes into getting a haircut in New York City is the exact same amount of labor that goes into getting a haircut in Shreveport, Louisiana, or Caracas. But the cost of a haircut in Shreveport or Caracas is much lower than the cost of a haircut in New York, because the amount of time put into it is the same, and that's what we tend to compensate people for, is their time as much as the actual labor. I don't think it explains everything, but there are good arguments that it explains a chunk of it. Of course, this also applies to administrators. So administrators are getting paid crazy amounts of money to move pieces of paper around rather than actually educate kids. You need some administrators just like you need some bureaucrats. I think one of the dumbest things the right does is say all bureaucrats are terrible. What you want is to have bureaucrats like they have in Switzerland. Good ones, competent ones that don't make you want to go on a 3-state killing spree after going to the DMV, right? And similarly, you want good college administrators, but you don't need, one college administrator for every, professor of mathematics.
A lot of things too. I think we underestimate. UF with the state made us do a survey of how much is being spent on basically DI administration. The budget for the University of Florida is something like $8 billion. $4 million out of an $8 billion budget was being spent on DEI. Now you may say that's $4 million too much. I might agree with you on that. But a lot of administrative bloat has to do with federal regulations, right? So like if you want to get rid of federal regulations, a lot of you want to go into public policy. There's a way to do it. Just get rid of federal regulations on some of this. So other questions? Yeah, Ruben.
Hi there, my name is Dylan Prochnicki. I'm coming from Georgetown University. And at Georgetown we consider ourselves sort of at the border, either the best of the worst or the worst of the best. So we still consider ourselves in the elite bucket, blah, 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 very insecure. I guess with that sort of the pessimistic tone in the conversation on higher education had me a little bit worried over here, going out and spending the next 60 years as a Georgetown man. But when I look at least my campus and I compare it with the crazy stuff that happened at Cambridge or in Princeton or at Penn, we seem to take the response to October 7th. We had a much more benign response. The president said, call the spade a spade and atrocity, atrocity, and we haven't had too much crazy business. And if I look at the student population, there are a lot of people who are sort of tired of the environment. And I guess to finally get into a question, I'm curious if you think that we've passed peak woke, and there will be a sort of, do you have optimism that the higher education will tone down the crazy in the coming years?
I think there's a good argument to be made that we hit peak woke. There are also good counter. Any large, complex cultural phenomenon is going to have evidence both the for and against position. I do think October 7th was again, the mask came off on a lot of this stuff. What is it Adam Smith says? There's a lot of ruin in a nation, right? There's going to be a long tail to all of this regardless. Institutions don't turn on a dime. And just so you know, I'm from Washington, D.C. I live not too far from Georgetown. A good friend of mine went to GW, George Washington University, and they refer to it as the Harvard of safety schools. So being the best of the second tier or the worst of the first tier is not so bad.
I hope so. I don't have any kind of real. I think you might be right. You're seeing more mainstream kind of columnists on the center left or liberals who are willing to kind of call out some of the madness. I think there is kind of some more attention being paid to it. But you know, we got to drain some of the crazy on the right too, because these things are like a Chinese finger trap. You know, you pull from both directions. And we need to kind of revive the vital center, I think. And so as long as they have just a dollop of plausibility to their paranoia, it's going to be hard to really kind of soothe that. But it's also going to require, I mean, I do think it's going to require some, I have seen this a little bit in some sense inside these departments, that they got to find at least one pet conservative. You know, there's just some sense that, oh my God, they're right. It's been 15 years since we've had anyone who hasn't, you know, been on the hard left in this department. So I think there are some opportunities there to sort of lobby, cajole, use the donor influences, use the student body, the alumni networks, and push your own universities. Write your own letters. You know, they do listen to. One of the things about universities is, if you want to have an outsized influence at a university, you can. Because most faculty and staff just want to do their own work, they don't want to get involved and so forth. That's why these kind of knots of hyper-woke people have such a kind of loud presence on most of these campuses, and everybody else is sort of sheltered and scared. Likewise with alumni. You know, if you get 50 alumni to sign a letter to a dean, that gets a meeting called and so forth. You know, so you know, do your own bit to help to turn this cruise ship around.
Yeah, one other point, on the point. The hardcore woke ideology stuff is starting to hurt the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And that's a feedback mechanism that causes a lot of people to wake up about a lot of things. You know, the best example of this kind of stuff is like a lot of the language weirdness, like Latinx. Turns out most Hispanics are either don't know the term or don't like the term, or straight up offended and feel condescended to by the term. You know, you talk to a normal Hispanic person, which again, Hispanic itself is kind of a weird term, because like Cuban Americans are different than Puerto Rican Americans, are different than, you know, Mexican Americans down the list. But you tell them, yeah, no, this is inclusive, and they're like, how so? It feels like you're lecturing to me, and then good luck actually degendering the Spanish language. That's and similarly, like I use this example all the time. Apologies to people who listen to my podcast, but you know, we can get in a conversation about the transgender stuff and all of that. As a matter of practical politics, it's a pretty poisonous issue for Democrats. And so, you know, Cori Bush, the congresswoman from Missouri, I think, St. Louis, you know, she got in a big brouhaha a few years ago because she referred to mothers as birthing persons. And she wouldn't back down about it. She was saying she's being inclusive, you guys are bigots, yada, yada, yada. Now, whether bigotry enters any of this is a debate for another time. The point is that if you talk to anybody who knows anything about survey research, it's a well-established finding that a lot of people have a positive association with the word mother. Many of this demographic are called mothers. The other big part of that demographic are people who have mothers. And to say that somehow you're being inclusive and not offensive and that you're the bigot for using the term mother, just in terms of practical politics, is the birthing person of all stupidity. And that kind of stuff does have feedback. It's like, you know, you guys are killing it. The defund the police thing was deathly for the Democratic Party. And it took a long time to actually say, to get to the bubble, blue bubble people who book all these shows on cable news, stop having these people on claiming that all black people in America want to get rid of the police, because there's just no evidence for it. And those kind of signals, they do work their way into these institutions.
Okay, so this is for all of you, but mostly for Mr. Goldberg. So you were talking about how a lot of times progressives have the same opinion, you know, as your liberal elites. And I think for the most part that's true, but I see a split here, which before, you know, even people like Foucault supported Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But now you see the old Democrat elites support Israel, while the younger ones, or younger progressives, don't only dislike Israel, they will be willing to support Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and basically are enemies of Iran. And have any explanations on why they're so willing to not only attack America, but support enemies that are entirely not progressive and very illiberal?
Yeah. Yeah. So part of it is they're just very wrong, right? It's very. There's a weird logic to populism that says, one person can be an idiot, but if there are a million of them, they must have a point. And it doesn't work that way. It's like, but no, more seriously, I would point out that Foucault was also a huge supporter of the Iranian Revolution, which at least puts a spin on his pro-Israelism.
Not to mention sexuality.
But yeah, look, I think this oppressor-oppressed narrative stuff is deeply poisonous and deeply problematic. But if it stems in part from the sort of Ibram Kendi argument about, and it's not just Ibram Kendi, I'm just using him as a stand-in for an argument made by lots of people, that says you only look at that statistical disproportionality is prima facie evidence of bigotry. And so if you have a system that says that Jews are disproportionately doing well, there must be some sinister explanation for it. They are oppressor types. And I think that there's a version of that applies to the understanding of Israel. I have very little, look, I'm very happy to criticize all sorts of things about Israel, and Bibi Netanyahu's outlived his shelf life. But I have very little tolerance for the settler colonialism stuff, right? Because if you actually really hate settler colonialism, you should have problem with China, which is a massive Jim Crow state that is erasing Tibet, erasing the Uyghurs, putting 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps. You should have problems with Russia, which is doing ethnic cleansing in Ukraine, and yet none of these people seem to have a problem with that. And so, it's part of my argument that the UN is structurally anti-Semitic. If you take the arguments and logic of institutional racism seriously, you can't look at how the UN operates and not say it doesn't single out the one Jewish country. And so I think that there is a kind of faddishness to a lot of the anti-Israel stuff among younger people. There's also, there are a lot of different explanations you can come up with, because I think it's an overdetermined phenomenon. But part of it is also, there's just an enormous amount of funding from Middle Eastern countries on a lot of these college campuses. A lot of these schools take a lot of foreign exchange students because you can charge them full tuition. And so they come from a lot of countries where the argument that Islamophobia is a much bigger and more dangerous phenomenon in the United States than anti-Semitism, which there's virtually no statistical evidence for, takes hold. So I think it's an ideological thing. I also think it's kind of a rebellious thing among young people. And it's kind of a anti-Americanism by proxy, where you get to say, there's a reason why Israel gets called the little Satan and America gets called the great Satan, because Israel is kind of representative of the same project that America is. And it's a way to sort of attack that idea without actually attacking your own country, although many of them are perfectly happy to attack their own country too.
Hi, I'm Alyssa. I go to UF. How do you guys see universities across the country having the ability to move away from secularization? Because I feel like I see a lot of issues. Will and I were in class together actually last semester, and saw a very big issue with that in one of the classes that I took, and especially even anti-Semitism. How do you see us moving away from that? Is that a faculty issue? Student demographics?
Oh, thanks. That's a tough one, because it's a broad social phenomenon, really, and one that's accelerated in the last 10 years. Non-religious affiliation, rising numbers of agnostics and atheists. Is it reversible? Religious people have a reproduction advantage, so we have that. But
we're all going to be Mormons.
I think part of it is faculty diversification will help. It's true in the Hamilton Center, I think, broadly speaking. I mean, we can't, we don't, as I say, we don't want to make counter-sectarian institutions, right? So outside of actual religious schools, I don't think one can, sort of get to kind of specifically hire people because they're religious or something just to diversify. So it has to be a more subtle process, but it will happen if you simply kind of drop some of the other kind of political screens and so forth, because there's this close correspondence at this point. It's a very interesting question why it's happening. So, I mean, I happen to think it's partly part and parcel of I mean, it's kind of celebrated on the left. Secularization is the freeing of the mind and so forth, all this kind of enlightenment pap. But I happen to think it's basically part and parcel of a general collapse of civil society and associational life in the country. And why don't people practice religion anymore? They're bored by it, and they're lazy, and they have these TVs in their pockets. And the same reason they don't go to theater and concerts or clubs. So in some sense, I'm not sure it's really a convicted secularization or atheism. It's sort of a complacent indifference. And so one of the things the university can do is make people think about things. And maybe that will, if you're someone who's religious and is hoping to see, the survival of your religion and so forth, I mean, I do think, there's something to be said for simply having a university where people are engaged by ideas across the spectrum, and those ideas aren't exiled or treated as second class. And there isn't a kind of regnant materialist naturalism, which there basically is in many universities at this point.
I mean, maybe just to pipe in on this one. I mean, this is a rare moment where I have some hope. As I'm teaching a freshman class at UF now called God and Science, I'm just teaching it straight, and it's a faculty thing, right? You just have to be able to walk in and say, one kid's like, I'm Hindu, another kid's I'm atheist, I'm Catholic, and it's fine. There's no tension in the class just because I just play it straight and don't play favorites and don't shut down. That's the best class I've ever had, ever, right, in 25 years of teaching by a long shot. So I think a lot of this really goes back to just being fair, right? And it's a faculty thing. And I think if faculty can just play it fair, just play it straight, and I think that opens up a lot of room for students just to be able to say what they need to say and to have, no pun intended, like it's just a safe space, right? To be able to say what they need to say without getting kneecapped. The other thing, it struck me. So yesterday I walked into class and I had a smudge on my forehead. It was Ash Wednesday. I'd been across the street at St. Augustine Church at 7 a.m. Heaving with students, packed. Like no pews room left at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday, filled with undergraduates. I was by far the oldest person in the room. So they're like green shoots around. It seems to me, and so throwing yourself into some sort of association. If you are, it's not just like rolling into Mass or rolling into church on Sunday. It's throwing yourself into RUF or throwing yourself into Jewish Gators or Catholic Gators, whatever it is. I think that's part of it, right? It really is going to take joining. I'm a terrible joiner, but it's going to take joining things, right? If you want to make it, better. So it's a faculty problem. It's also kind of a joining problem. Maybe one last question, and then we'll go. Yeah.
Hi. So my name's Lexi. I am at Penn. So a harbor of anti-Semitism, I guess, right now. But I think the shaping of the curriculum point was probably the most interesting point that was made tonight, and it is really undersold, so I just wanted to say that. We don't have a Civil War historian at Penn. Been lobbying for this for like the last 4 years. It's absurd. It's Philadelphia. How do we not have a Civil War historian? Even from an anti-racist perspective, you should want one of those. But one of the things I'm actually really concerned about that no one really touched on was the lack of appetite for a lot of these ideas among young right-wing students. So even what I've seen at Penn, Penn's obviously kind of an exception because it's so pre-professional, but people don't really have an appetite to speak up in class. They don't really have an appetite to explore conservative ideas in their own time, even when they are kind of provided by professors who are more open-minded, even if they are liberal. They don't really engage with them, and as a result of this kind of vacuum, they're sucked into the Charlie Kirks of the world, which I don't necessarily blame them, because they're not really getting the moral formation in other ways. So how do you fix that? Because unless the consumers are telling the companies what they want, there's no way to actually effectuate this change. And it comes off as paternalistic if you have a student or a professor who's telling you, well, this is what you should want, but that's not what students actually desire.
Yeah, so I have quite a few college professor friends, and one of them is a historian, and he was the first person to point this out to me 30 years ago, is there used to be these things called bookstores. And if you go to the bookstore, the history section is basically 95% military history, World War II, Civil War, and most of those books are written by non-academic historians because they can't get jobs at universities, right? Which is just appalling for all sorts of intellectual reasons, but also just as a pure business, thing. Like those are the important stories that make history. Those are the gateway drug stories that get people interested in history. And so I do think one of the reasons why history and English suffer so much is that when you reduce everything down to sort of allegories about intersectionality and identity politics, you don't actually have to engage with the text because you know the answers already, right? And it just makes everything kind of boring. It's sort of like Killers of the Flower Moon wasn't a terrible movie because it exposed racism and bigotry and terrible things that America did. It's that it thought the interesting part was that, and so it told you the book is a murder mystery. And you don't know who's doing the killing until the end of the book. In the movie, they tell you who the murderer is in like the first friggin' 20 minutes, and then you have 3 more hours of them just wallowing in how terrible white people are. And or white male people, right? Pale penis people, source of all evil. And it's just like, I get it already, tell me a story. And so I think, stories are really, really important. Western civilization is just the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And making that story alive and interesting is a huge part of all of this. But it does not surprise me that there are a lot of right-wing students that aren't interested in this stuff either, because a lot of these problems start much earlier in the pipeline, and a lot of these problems have to do with the culture generally and kids with short attention spans because of TikTok and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, there are lots of explanations for it, and not all of them fit neatly into liberals bad, conservatives good. I mean, a lot of it has to do with just problems we have. But the worst sin you can do is if you can make Shakespeare and the Civil War and World War II boring, what the hell are you doing teaching a class? And yet that's what they kind of do, because if it's the same story over and over again, go study something where you can actually get a job.
Yeah, I mean, Jonah hit a lot of the points there. I would say that it's partly a crisis of high school education. The history curriculum has been decimated across the U.S. And literature as well. So I mean, people have had bad experiences with their high school learning. I also think, how is it that they've alienated conservatives from history? I mean, you would think they'd be the natural constituent for it. But it just goes to show how deeply the ideological frame, and also I do think the exiling of whole subjects has been. But I would note that it's funny how many right-wing populists write really crappy popular histories. I mean, almost every Fox personality writes a lousy book about some revolutionary figure. So I think there is a kind of natural audience for better stuff if we could just rebuild a kind of less, shall we say, woke perspective on it, or retrieve narrative history, biography. These things are still very popular as kind of genres of reading. So I'm not totally pessimistic, but I take your point. There's a utilitarianism abroad and a vocationalism about people's education. I tell students, double major. Do your engineering and then do history or something on the side.
well, maybe give it the last word. I say this as a father of 2 daughters, right? I noticed this in classes. Female conservatives don't have a problem arguing. Guys do, right? I mean, there is a kind of problem of the American conservative male. And they hide off, I'm just going to go into stats, or I'm going to go into business, or I'm going to go into something. And it's just a kind of safe space, and I'm not going to have to go argue with a bunch of, And so figuring out how to solve that, I think, goes a long way to getting at the kind of problem that you, and look, colleges are 60% women, right? I mean, it's a feature of colleges. I'm not sure it's a healthy feature, but it is a feature. And so finding a way strikes me as getting sort of conservative men back into the fray is going to be a healthy thing for everybody, universities, political life, etc. And not having, if I may say it, not having someone like Trump be a role model, right? Having other people who can be good role models might be something that would be good for the polity and for higher education. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thanks AEI for
thanks again, Robert, Jonah, and Jeff. What a treat to have you all with us. Y'all may have not known this, but Jonah just got back from vacation and came straight here to be with us. So we should feel truly blessed. Well, in case we haven't met, my name is Camille Messer. I work on the AEI academic programs team. It's really, really fun to be here with you all, especially you seniors. It's really fun to see y'all launch into this new season. And for the University of Florida students, we're so glad you're here. Thanks for welcoming us to your campus. It's beautiful. And I look forward to meeting you all tomorrow. Just a couple quick housekeeping announcements. We will aim to be out of this space in the next 20 to 30 minutes, so feel free to chit-chat and then make your way back to the hotel. AEI students, we will see you downstairs on the first floor in meeting room A/B for breakfast beginning at 8:30. We will have a very fancy quarter zip waiting for you there, so come excited. And we'll start promptly at 9:30 for Haley's session. So that's a really rich time. Both Lauren Collins and I did this as undergraduates, and it was really impactful for us. University of Florida students, we'll see you at Emerson Alumni Hall starting at 1 tomorrow for lunch. And we're really excited. If you haven't also, you should have all received an email from Swap Card, which has all sorts of info on it too. Our wonderful intern, Leah, who is here with us, built it all out. It included lots of articles. So if you liked any of the speakers tonight and want to follow them more, there's links to their podcasts and recent work. So without further ado, let's give another round of applause.